Welcome, everyone. Dr. Thor here, and I want to continue my discussion on the Tall Whites, as they're called, from Charles James Hall's series of books, which I'm just about through with, which are very interesting accounts here. And this is a very interesting guy, which I'm not really sure what to make of this guy. Apparently, he has now become a um, nuclear physicist and has gotten a degree in that and other high degrees. So this is not a guy who doesn't understand things or some sort of person here. Even though I do find him, of course, just because you're highly educated, I don't know if that's good or bad for any kind of deductive or skills or coping skills. Does that mean anything because you can pass tests? I don't think so. Most scientific type people with high degrees are quite odd. They're quite strange. They have all the same problems we all do. Now, what's interesting is we go into volume 2 here of this whole Millennium Welcoming series, which are interesting. Now, the books are filled with a lot of military information as well. He talks about a lot of the work he's doing, because if he just wrote about the aliens and his experiences, well, that would be probably one book. Now, he's only had contact with these tall whites, as they're called, for a couple of years. And I'll be reading his further books as he talks about the Greys, traditional Greys, and of course the Blondes, or the Nordics as they're commonly called, which he ran into as well, which are different. And there's confusion here, and there's a lot of, when you look through things, I look very carefully at the mentality, the way the tall Greys work and communicate. Now, what's very interesting is while apparently the tall Greys have been in this particular area probably for hundreds or thousands of years, at least going to that place is some sort of way station. And apparently there's now an underground base where they live in. Now, this is talked about on several different levels here all over the country. Not only are there huge underground bases for military and political people, but there is supposed extraterrestrial bases under the ground for lots of different races of extraterrestrials. Of course, this makes sense. Where else? You can't put them on the top. They can't really integrate. All these things are all part of, well, how would they come here and get by? Again, you're not going to get anything real from government and society. What they're going to do is tell you this is all fantasy and it's kept to a select few. I mean, this story gets very complicated when you start picking it apart for how they're handling it, but there's a method, I think, to the madness that's described here that makes a lot of sense to me. People are disconnected. Some people know. Some people don't. Some of these are directly involved. This certainly is an outpost where nobody wanted to work. And they kept him there because he was able to handle it and became kind of, quote, friendly. And we'll talk about that with these these tall Greys extraterrestrials. So they wanted him there to get handled. Now, why they didn't keep him there, maybe they figured after 2 years he couldn't take it anymore, and then moved him into a combat zone, which risked his life, is very strange to me. I don't quite understand why he went from a weather statistical person into the combat field in Vietnam. We also have to understand that these books are set in 1965. People think, oh, well, that's not too long ago. Well, you got to remember that's pre-Star Trek, which I believe came on TV in 66 or 67 or 60, I don't know, late 60s, and was only on for 3 years. This was the big start of spacey stuff. Now, is that the first Lost in Space? Other things started to come here in terms of the space stuff after the moon landing, which was in 69. So you didn't have all the jargon, the understanding, the extraterrestrials that were in your household started with Star Trek. So before that, this is very frightening, and it's still frightening. People are frightening in general. It's frightening if I took you and dropped you in the middle of Mumbai now, in a and into all these people that don't look like you in a very let's say put you in a ghetto situation where you couldn't speak the language, you would be horribly frightened. So imagine if it's even past that when you have these extraterrestrials, which we would generally call creatures. They are not human in any way. So they really aren't. As I've mentioned in my other lectures, there's a certain humanity of them, because if you're going to function in this world, and it seems like every single extraterrestrial that has had contact with are humanoid, meaning they have hands and feet. The only ones that have been talked about that aren't like this, and I'm not really sure why that is the insectoids, the praying mantises, which do have kind of a flexibility to them, but have such a tiny brain size that I don't really believe those stories. And I'm not sure why they're projecting at people as bugs, which aren't really. And praying mantis, I always found fascinating, but they're kind of spooky looking. Why would you do that? So generally, if you're going to dominate and get ahead, you need hands and feet. Why? Everything in life, as I've been telling people for years, comes down to what? You are human. What do humans do? What do Homo sapiens do more than any other species? They make things. They make tools. Tools make machines. That's why we dominate. It has nothing to do with intelligence. So other animals are far more superior physically and mentally. Humans are cunning, and they're able to use hands to make tools. So look at how powerful an elephant or a lion is. You don't have a physical chance in hell if you have to combat them, unless you got a tool. Starts with a spear, ends with a machine gun. They have no chance at all against that cunning. Is that intelligent? A pointy thing on a stick? Not really. So that's a primitive way of doing things, but we can hold it, we can stab, we can do other things. Can an elephant hold a spear? No. Can a tiger hold a spear? No. So this is a problem that people have to understand. So all advanced societies logically have to look like that. Now, whether they've advanced into computers or into more energy beings, well, that seems to be a natural. But you're going to have to be able to, if they're physical entities, and this is the reality here that we're dealing with. When we get into non-physical entities, everything changes. I'm going to do a lecture on that as well, because that really takes us into another one. What are spirits, extraterrestrials, etc.? So this is a discussion unto itself. So what's fascinating here is how do these extraterrestrials think and act? Now, while this was written in relatively recent times, what I find interesting about the writings is they don't seem to be polluted with the science fiction realities that everyone knows of now. The Stargates, the Star Treks, and all these things that show extraterrestrials, how they work, good, bad, or indifferent. I think the way these extraterrestrials are portrayed makes a lot of sense to me. It makes a lot of sense to me because they are very, what you would consider human and taking a proper aspect. Meaning the fact that they're not all loving or hateful. Why would they talk to you if they want to just destroy you? They're also not highly evolved, wonderful creatures giving you platitudes of philosophical nonsense. Now, his contacts and everybody that goes there is scared to death of these extraterrestrials. They are not friendly. They are not really trying to work with people. There was an attack on a person that was there. The one commonality throughout all the books is that these extraterrestrials are deadly. They're well armed and they will kill you if need be. They don't hunt you to kill you. They're not trying to, but they have no problem in killing you if they feel there is something going on wrong. They also, interestingly, which of course does make sense in some ways and not, if they've been coming here so long, they don't seem to know that much. They're asking for help and how to do things. And, of course, the base is located in Nevada near Las Vegas, yet Few of them seem to understand Las Vegas. They want to go there and do things, which again, they've claimed they have, but I find that difficult as well. They are humanoid, not human-like, and I'll get into that description as well here. Now, tall whites is just that. Tall whites doesn't mean tall. No, 6 foot. A lot of people are 6 foot. The average height in the United States, from what I understand, is 5'8". Only 10% of the population are 6 foot and above, supposedly. So I don't know what the figures are right now, but that's kind of in the ballpark. So if you're 6 or 7, if you're 7 or 8 feet, not only are you going to stick out, unless you're on a basketball team, you're going to really stick out. So there's no way you can pass. Not only that, they're very thin, and they are not humanoid. White as a sheet of paper is not what people look like. So-called white people are basically pink. You know, we use a lot of terminologies just to, oh, well, this guy, well, black people are generally not black. They're more dark brown. So, you know, all of those things that we get into that are not, you know, they classify things. But certainly, as we know, the color white is certainly not what white people look like. They're more pinkish. So the whole idea is that white is a general term that has been thrown out there. Not in this case. They're supposed to be white as a piece of paper. You know how white that is? Hold a piece of white paper up to your face and have some. Well, I mean, it's so obvious. If you walk around with a face like that, you are going to be noticed. Now, supposedly, they were looking for makeup and other things. I'm assuming that was to cover up their white features. But the author talks about them going into town like you would never know them because they look exactly like you. They also stated this as well to all of these things that they blended in so easily. They even went to talk to a particular military guy, supposedly that they hurt, to see if he was okay. I'll get back into that as well. An interesting little odd and almost strange detail. But you're 7 feet, you're white as a sheet, nobody's going to notice that, right? And if you think people are odd in casinos, well, they're not odd. They're just kind of ugly in casinos. Las Vegas, I call the ugly city. You know, there's a lot of ugly people there. And that seems to me. And there, if you walk around, you see typical people there of every race and creed. But, you know, there's something very common about all races and creeds. You know, if you see a 7-foot person, you're going to notice them. So, no matter what they are. So, you're going to say, where's the basketball team? So, this is ridiculous. So, I don't buy that. Secondly, people are not white as snow walking around. Now, the only people that I know that do that, there's some makeups and tribal things, and of course the Japanese kabuki dancers and the Japanese culture tends to put white on their face, but this is part of what they consider attractive, and they've used in their theater and social events, so they paint their faces white because they've always had a thing for white, the Japanese in particular. But white. They're not making themselves Caucasian looking. They're making themselves white as snow. So you're certainly going to do that. Secondly, if you're that tall and you try and go out to buy things, you're going to have difficulties getting clothes fitting you. And they're supposed to be very thin. So some things don't quite measure up here. I find the integration that these people could be sitting next to you somewhere, at least the tall whites as they're classified are, is not really something that sounds like it. So this is what happens when you really research, and I've now spent hours and hours listening to these his 5 books that you find out. Secondly, apparently their hands or their fingers are kind of oddly shaped. The Invaders TV show in the 60s. So the whole idea is that they had a pinky that was misshaped. It was the only way to tell that they were part of the hostile alien invasion. Now these apparently have almost claw-like fingers to a certain degree. Again, you notice people's hands. They have to grab things. Now I guess they could wear gloves and other things to cover this up to some extent, but good luck finding that. So there's a lot of interesting things. But the one thing that we know about this is everybody is afraid of these entities because they are constantly watching you, playing with you, and not really being friendly. Now, after spending a long time with the tall grays, Charles here, who again has written this initially as a novel, and he changed the names. Now, there's a problem here with this. Now, he's saying everything is real, everything. Well, I don't really think that's true. If you're writing something as a novel, you're going to, let's say a historical novel, you're going to keep to the basic history, but you're going to add things in, and I think I've caught many of them that don't make sense. You're also going to make it more interesting. You're not going to give all the alien information in one book. So he goes pages after pages of saving people in a drama. Now, this sounds very novel-like to me. Now, he was running this weather area. Now, this weather area where planes would do bombing runs and other things apparently also had runways and things. And if there was any great trouble, he would bring people into this area to land. Military craft and everything else. So every book has, I don't know, 30%, 40%, 50% is him talking about what he did in saving one person after another, making him a fantastic hero, and him even stating it. Now, I don't know how true all this is, but it makes good drama. If you're going to write something, well, how much can you... They're tall whites. They walk like this. They shoot red laser beams out of their bottoms and ears. They like to eat at McDonald's. I mean, how much are you going to put? One book is going to do that. So what he's done is extrapolated on what is really a boring job and turning it into the fact that because he knew the weather conditions and because he was near tarmac or some sort of landing strip, that flights that were in trouble and bad wind, whether they were commercial or civilian or military, he was able to guide down and supposedly did this with numerous people and saved their lives. Well, I hope that's true. That's a great story. Very great story. So, but is it true or is it just a way to punch up these 5 books, which really should be one book? So there's certainly, if someone has been here for so long, they've had interaction, they've pretty much, and as I said, this comes back to a discussion I'm going to have on what are all these things? What's an extraterrestrial? What's a spirit? What's a god? What is the mix here? And it's a very interesting way of looking at things, and we know there are spirits. There are people that are dead. What is what and where? But we'll go into that in another area. Very fascinating. But let's get back to these. A lot of things don't add up here in terms of, but their attitude is very interesting. What's the attitude? So, and of course, we've never had this kind of information that I've read in any other books, because people have never had constant contact with extraterrestrials. They're being abducted, they're on ships, they have a very skewed viewpoint of what's happening to them. So there isn't this connected day after day for months after months and getting to know extraterrestrials in most books. So you read about, well, I was taken on a ship, I was done this, I was done that. I have some, people see babies, really horrific stories. You hear about these being treated pretty much like a zoo animal. Getting past that is very hard. Then there are books like the one I did a review on, the Janus people who claim to have come here that look exactly like us and who have settled in with the population. How much of that is going on? They apparently destroyed their planet through a nuclear problem with generators that blew up and had to leave. What does that mean? Palladians, they look like us. They claim to be our ancestors. What? So what do we mean with all this and how much? Is our society so screwed up because we've got all these goofball aliens around here that are totally disconnected, could care less about the planet? Some people think that because these tall grays like hot environments. That's why they settled in this horrific area of the desert, which I have lived in a similar for many years. So I can attest to the kind of horrible environment that deserts are. You're talking about oppressive heat for almost all the time, and when the heat is done, the winds come. But they like the heat. Yeah, because where they come from is close. So what would you do? So global warming, well, it makes it better for them. Some people say this of the reptilians. Well, they like a more radioactive environment, which is why our environment is becoming more radioactive. And that's why nuclear power plants are almost always placed on earthquake fault lines or next to oceans, places where they can be affected horribly, which you wouldn't think you'd do that. And why would you even have nuclear power, which is a giant time bomb where you've basically lit the fuse? It's just that you're not sure when it's going to go off. So the whole idea is that it's very, very interesting that you start seeing these things. And this is what you want to pick up in terms of details. People get caught up. But as I said, his books are loaded with boring stuff about his what he's doing to help people and so forth. And of course, as I said, it may be as much as 60% of the books as you go through them of this. And of course, he's a fantastic hero. But if you're writing a novel, like he was doing, and that's what he did. He calls himself Baker, Charles Baker in the books, which is his pseudonym for himself. So he's blended stuff in. How much has he blended in? How much money did he want to make? I mean, these were supposedly released by his wife and children at a time of unemployment so that they could make some money. We do have to keep that in mind. Does that make him terrible? We all need money. Doesn't make him terrible. The fact that he put in stuff glorifying himself and what he was doing, well, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that. We do need to understand that these are written in novel form. Not as, well, here's what I've determined about, here's what I've kind of done as a research project, here's what the tall grays are about. So he talks about his inner reactions with them. He doesn't make too many comments about them, but we must remember that they seriously injured a particular person out there who was not being aggressive to them. As I've mentioned in my other lecture, I think he may have surprised them or something happened. They're very protective. Duh. Shouldn't they be? Are humans loving and friendly? They're going to bring out Kool-Aid and hot dogs to you out there. Most likely, as what happened in Roswell and other places, there was some talk that they found some of these aliens, and when they hit them with their rifle butts because they were afraid of them. Humans kill everything. You're afraid of something, what do? You attack it. You don't generally sit there and say, well, let's try and communicate. You'll say, let's blow it up and we'll go from there. So, which I find credible about the descriptions of these entities because of the fact that this makes sense. And if they were to look at the earth and see what people do in the civilizations, they would see all the negativity here. There isn't much positive. Certainly, this, and I don't know what kind of run-ins they've had or had not. I mean, after knowing these aliens for a while, Charles stated to one of the leaders there, and what's also interesting is they apparently seem to have different society structures. They have police, they have guards, they have teachers, they have regular people. There are men, there are women, there are children. So they brought an entire society here to live or visit. And there seems to be a tourist business going on of new people coming to this planet. And they're very, very careful because they do understand that this is an armed, dangerous group of people who will kill you. And they have the same attitude. So this guy who happened to him, they seriously burned him and gave him third degree by coming out of using some sort of device. Everybody claimed that they were highly armed at all times and were willing to use it. And they almost killed several of the military people there because they didn't like what they did. And from what I can tell, none of it was overly aggressive. But when Charles talked to one of these, and I'm not sure if it was a guard or one of the other ones, he said, well, I'll be very careful and make sure I watch for your children so nothing happens to them. The response was, from the alien was, we'll do the same. Not, hey, thank you for watching my children. Now, this would be a normal response you'd get into a TV script. If you were trying to be aggressive, saying, you better do what I'm saying, you would make a response like that. You wouldn't say, thank you, and we will be watching as well. No, none of that is happening, and there's no nicey talk here. They don't seem to be coming out with any nicey talk. While they seem to be able to communicate with English, or it could be telepathically, which seems to be what's really happening, the kind of sounds they make are more animal and bird-like, which again makes sense to a degree. Human communication based on our oxygen environment and the kind of lung system, well, I'm not sure they necessarily have that. So they used more, they sound like animals, which of course, if you were out in the wilderness and heard animals and other sounds, you would think it was very normal. Well, it could be extraterrestrials out in that desert area. I've heard a lot of weird noises out in the desert areas I've been into, and now I'm really wondering, because you don't see that many animals, why are there so many animal-type sounds? Now, the other interesting thing, so they're not really friendly. They have established a relationship with him, which is why they kept him there, and then they tried to kill him by sending him to Vietnam. I mean, this was a very hot time of the war, and he was sent out to a forward base, which I didn't think the Air Force were at, but apparently he went through 35 direct attacks on his base by the Vietnamese. So this is quite interesting. So he got put in a very hot zone, and this seemed to have greatly affected him, and he goes into a lot of detail of what happened in Vietnam and all the tragedies and horrible things he saw and went through. Has this somehow caused him to extrapolate in these books or even make up everything here? Well, I don't think so. There has been, of course, reports of tall grays in other areas. People have spotted them, not as much. I mean, the extraterrestrials that are seen the most often are the grays, and there are lots of different grays. The contacts I have been more a cyborg. They're biological entities, but they're basically cyborgs. They go out and abduct people. They're researched. Now, a real robot would be made like a human. Why? Humans are perfect. I just went over why. Hands, feet are critical. You can't make a robot like that. You need to make a cyborg. So, so it makes sense. So these are what's seen the most often. There seems to be levels of these. And of course, how would you make a cyborg? Would it look like a creature? No, it look like you. So we've seen this with Data and Star Trek and everything else. You make them as human as possible. Apparently he even had sexual functioning, I believe. So the whole idea is that you would make them exactly like you. So that's it. Now the tall grays, which apparently are infested in this particular area, have had bases here. And why were they able to stay there and even wanted to? Well, there does seem to be a strong component here. And there's a lot to talk about. And I'm not going to go on too long on this particular part, which is part 2. I'll pick it up in other ones. They are very aggressive and cannot be affected easily. Meaning that fighting them is difficult. And but you got to remember, let's go back again. This is 1965. A lot has changed in the, what are we talking about? 50 years is a long time in the technologies. Now, apparently the military was working with them. They must have had people watching in other areas, but not here. I think him and others were more experimental. They wanted to see how people got along with them. And then, of course, when he did, they kind of just threw this guy into the trash by putting him a very intelligent person with high mathematical abilities, which is so typical of the military, threw him into combat. What is all that about? So that is ridiculous, but very, very typical of how the military just throws people away. Now, here's a guy that could have been used and should have been probably brought into the intelligence agencies working with these people, which apparently was going on. Yet there's contradictories there. Some of his local officers, the people right above him or he worked with, appeared to know nothing about this. And when they talked about this, they said, oh, you're crazy, we're going to throw you in prison, you're just a mental case, etc., etc. And was even brought up on some charges, I believe. This is a lot of information to go through here and remember. And when they did, the commanding officer above his commanding officer yanked the paperwork and gave him an award, which is a way of telling that officer that you're wrong, this is none of your business, don't do this. But the point is that they carried weapons and were ready to use them and had guards all the time. So they were highly protective of their people and their children, like everybody is, and they are willing to use deadly force at a drop of a hat. So here we go again of showing that. Now, does that make sense? Oh, these are terrible aliens. Well, what I like about it is it just sounds normal. You can't be open with human beings. They are very violent, crazy mothers. So you would have to have this attitude. But, and they were never really friendly. They have a very standoff attitude. Is this from years? And of course, they talk about meeting pioneers coming over the hills. You were talking about they lived to be 800 or 900 years old, and of course, they've been on this planet in one way or another. I don't know if visiting or other things, very hard to tell. And of course, they never told him where they were from. There's very little information they would share, period. Which is interesting again, and fits into their attitude. Well, these are crazy mothers. Why should I tell them where we're from, give them extra information, etc.? Apparently, the military, who was kind of working with them, and there's, as I said, there's some contradictory information here, that they worked with, I'm not sure that they were militarily at that particular time able to deal with them. And they were not that interested in exchanging military information or anything else. So there was an exchange of technologies, but apparently they were smart about it and did it at a limited level. So they have guards, they have military people. He's talked about ships crashing in terms of having to be fixed, and they bring out people who are repair people and everything else. So this is a complicated society, and where were they coming from? There seems to be indications of people coming and going all the time. Again, you would have to spend lots of research reading these over and over again to figure it all out, but it talks about this. But their basic way of operating was the fact that they acted what we would consider like a ghost, and they glowed like your classic movie world ghost looks like. This glowing white image, and they would pop in places, they would get indoors, they would move items, take items, they could come and go as they want, they weren't restricted by physical means. Well, again, this makes sense, because everything will boil down to becoming less and less physical if you're going to be an advanced entity. Now, this changes as well because they do seem to be communicating through telepathy. It makes sense. And this is mentioned again, and they apparently had all sorts of electronics, or at least that's how he interpreted it, on them. They function within protective space suits. They didn't glow. The suits glowed. Okay? This is important to understand because these are energy suits, which made them impregnable, the fact that they made them invincible. It allowed them to carry equipment that they used for communications and other ways. Again, this kind of makes sense. It's not going to be part of you, and this is why the grays and other things have been misinterpreted looking like. Well, these are suits they're wearing, and they also have types of helmets they wear and other things, depending on the grays and whether. This gets very complicated. But these suits made them invincible. And he had a discussion with them about this because he wanted to make sure that Charles understood that he could not hurt them. He said that you guys come out here with guns and you think that you can hurt us. And I said, you can't hurt us with guns. Guns are nice to have if you're worried about the potentially dangerous animals here. And this comes down to the fact that they then demonstrated what he did there. And of course, it would have been nice to use an actual gun so we had a better idea. But, does it matter to a certain degree? Well, I think it does and doesn't. But the point is, he said, well, here, throw rocks at us. So he got a good-sized rock that he could throw well and threw it at them. The rock moved in slow motion and just fell to the floor. So the whole idea is they're able with their suits, so they say, to control any matter coming out at them. Makes a lot of sense. If you're advanced, how would you protect yourself? Well, a rock being thrown at you is not too much different than a bullet. A bullet is just a piece of metal, which is hard, being pushed at you at a very high rate of speed. That's all it is. It's very primitive. It's a piece of metal, and of course it tears the hell out of you, depending on the size of that piece of metal, the velocity, etc. And of course, human beings are not really good for fighting physically or in combat. So all you have to do is take a knife to somebody, and what is that, a pointy stick? Well, more people have been killed with knives and pointy sticks than anything else out there. So the point is they would have this kind of defense. If you're going to go places and stay on a planet, well, you're going to have to wear this suit. But the suit is glowing and obnoxious. Why? You have to ask that as well. Is that just part of the technology they can't avoid? But what also did these suits is that they created a non-physical entity. Now, I've seen this myself with the Greys that float in and out of places. They become ghost-like to enter buildings, and then they're able to become more physical. And obviously, if you want to affect the Greys, you can only affect them when they're physical. And there are ways of doing that at that particular time. If you can disrupt their energy fields, or when they become physical, they're not really expecting attacks, and then you can attack them. Well, that's some more technical stuff that I will talk about in the future. But these people were not, or these entities are very well aware of that. So what they would do is they would pop up behind you. Just think how frightening it is that you're having somebody just pop up behind you. Apparently their children love to levitate all over the place. They really don't walk. They float. And this, of course, makes sense again. Their suits give them anti-gravity. Why would you walk places? It's very fatiguing. If you can, and apparently their physical bodies aren't that strong, and they're actually a little bit fragile, even though they can live hundreds of years. And this is probably because they've moved past the physical, which is important. But if you live 800 years, what do you care? This is how they operate. So he witnessed on many occasions the children floating in and out of his truck, going through the open windows, playing. They'd also come into the buildings and do this, and so would them as well. And he had a certain relationship with one of the females there who was asking questions, who wanted to go into Las Vegas to buy clothing because what was provided to them by the military was hideously ugly. Well, that certainly rings true of the fact that they were providing them with very practical, ugly clothes, and who would want that? Well, everybody wants to look good, and of course, apparently females in the universe all want to look good. They also stated the fact of how they could control all the games in Vegas. And they asked, how much money would I need if I have to go out and buy lots of clothes? But of course, there's a lot of disconnect here. Well, how are you going to get the money? You need the clothes first to go into casinos, but how are you going to do this? So it didn't quite connect there. But they could control all those games easily. So if you see somebody winning in a casino and he's kind of tall, who is that? Well, I'd like to get to know some of these people if they have these kind of abilities to get a little extra income or a lot of extra income. But apparently they could go, and of course it would make sense. They could affect slot machines. They could easily affect the things that happen in gaming and may very well do it. And people that win a lot could be extraterrestrials controlling these. What's the easiest way to make money? So, I'm going to go, well, you open up stock accounts, get bank accounts. All you have to do is get a certain amount of money, or even a tiny bit of money, and then go into a casino to get your bankroll going. And then you could win hundreds of thousands of dollars and go from there. So it's quite interesting of how all those things actually will work and makes a lot of sense again. Think of the logic of it. You want to figure something out. How does that fit into the real world? When people tell you they time travel, they do this, well, get into the commonness. Well, how did you get around? You have no ID. Did you walk? Your clothes are different. Did you go ahead of time, back in time? You got nothing. Your credit cards don't work. You got no cash that works. So all these things is how you figure out people who are lying to you or not. That's why the devils are in the details. What details are you given? Does it make sense? And these books have a lot of these details, even though there are some conflicting factors here. So they wanted to go out from them, they wanted to go in, and wouldn't you want to go into the civilizations you were visiting on a more personal basis? And apparently they did this frequently and went and saw Las Vegas shows, etc. But here again, these are not that humanoid. They're tall, they're fragile, they're kind of odd looking, they do have some vocal problems. All of these things come in there that there is a bit of disconnect here that we have to look at. What the connect is that they are very violent. They're very quick to kill anybody that intimidates them, and probably rightfully so. Because what does any human being respect? And they respect the fear of death. So all of this makes a lot of sense in those aspects. But there wasn't a great friendliness. He had a certain friendliness with this one female he had some conversations with, but it wasn't like Buddy, and they didn't really care if they frightened you or anything else. They did what they want. They visited and virtually terrorized people. Now the person, an interesting little tidbit he puts in there, this person who they burnt badly, for what apparently seems to be no reason, they wanted to find out what happened to him. So they claim that they went and found him in the civilian world, and they spoke with him for about a half an hour. 3 of them went there and met him somewhere and somehow talked. Now this is, again, are you that open? Now apparently they were able to disguise themselves enough to do this. And they spoke with him and said, well, he really wasn't traumatized. He's perfectly healed. He's doing fine. He just stated all this stuff so he could get government benefits. Well, I don't know about all that as well. If you've been fried by an alien, you're going to be very traumatized by it. Now, how lasting that was and how you could get information out of somebody by meeting them, I think, at a fast food restaurant for 30 minutes is kind of bizarre. Now, whether he was mind-controlled or whatever there, but it's interesting that they went and checked somebody to see what their effects were. But that could be for their own reasons. They wanted to see how well their weapons worked. Not necessarily was there a caring there. But there doesn't seem to be a history of them murdering people for no apparent reason. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But they were not friendly, per se. The average person, they were very protective of their own people, which again makes sense. They have guards, they have militaries, they have scientists, they have repair people, and that were all there. Now, supposedly, there was money made, put aside by the military to build a $300 million underground base there, which would be billions in today's money in the late or middle 60s. So when we look at these people, and of course there's very little information, and of course he wasn't really looking at that. He was just trying to survive. He says this through his entire book. He was very afraid that they were going to kill people because they were always armed and they always were willing to pull their guns, so to speak, at a drop of a hat. So people were very afraid of them. They all knew they were carrying weapons. They were not carrying weapons. They had no defense. The Air Force people, and even if they did, as we've mentioned, guns have always been things that don't work well against extraterrestrials. So if you're going to think you're going to shoot something with guns, it just ain't going to happen. Bullets have rolled out of the end of barrels. They fall down in front. I mean, there are many, many cases. So even if people had that, but they had none of that. And they told Charles that these are worthless and probably were, as I've already stated. But everybody was afraid of them, and almost everyone but him refused to go work there after going there. Everybody was scared to death. Can you imagine having these ghosty creatures popping up around you all the time? And they can kill you, or at least that's it. But it would just be frightening in general. So this is all part of the process that everybody should quite understand. Not overly unusual. If these kind of things were happening like that, which apparently they were. So all these areas, and of course there is nobody else to come forward. I don't know if anybody else is still alive, but they probably don't want to come forward and corroborate his story or not. It does, with the details in it, does make a bit of sense. with all the different things, the way giving them this kind of more human aspect to them makes sense. So that's what it would be. Why are they coming here? Why are they continue to come here? Why have they been here for hundreds of years? Well, there's no answers to any of this because apparently they refuse to give answers. And as he said, he wasn't there trying to find out about them or trying to get this long list of information. He was very fearful of them, so he was trying to work with them just kind of to survive. So that means you're not going in depth in all these things and what they actually do and not. So it's a very fascinating story. It makes a lot of sense. Now, supposedly this entire area now has been closed down. Makes sense. And this is how things work. You close down areas, and now they no longer exist. They're 20, 30 years ago, and of course 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, when you get really these kind of amount of time, everything has disappeared. And this is exactly what people do, so you can't prove anything. The people in that area have moved. He's not a young man, and it doesn't appear that he's overly well. It seems like in the movies that he was being helped by his wife in what considers a wheelchair, or had to sit down. So people are going to die. Commanders that may have been 50 or 60 at that time are now dead, so you can't go to the military people and ask them what happened. Files are then hidden and destroyed. So, I mean, this is how you do things. So whatever was happening in that area in terms of military contact is apparently no longer, but the bases are there. And these groups are there, and the way the book portrays it is that these people are intermixing with societies all the time, as supposedly the Janus people are, and God knows how many other people. So if we're having strange problems, if we're having all these things that come to what's going on now, and the odd way people are functioning, a very irrational way, are these extraterrestrials that don't get the society or don't care? Do they want to make the planet hotter and higher in radiation because that's where they come from? And you got to remember, when you have a lifespan that goes hundreds of years, you're not in a hurry. And this is one of the problems with comprehension of the average human living now, is that you've got about 60 active years if you're lucky. And it's over with. It's as simple as that. So the bottom line is that you don't see far in the future. You're only worrying about tomorrow or a few years ahead. If you live hundreds of years, you'd be thinking completely different. So these are all the amazing things. So this is what's been brought on. I'm going to go into other factors here in my additional reports on his series of 5 books. And as he said, there's an awful lot. He goes into a lot of information on his time in Vietnam, which I'm not overly personally interested in, the traumas he went through, the horrors of that war. Well, that doesn't help me in this area. I certainly understand that. That's part of his world view and what affected his life. And of course, that gives the book some meat. As I mentioned, this would be one book without all these other things put there. The books are ripe with the fact of how great work he's doing and how many lives he's saved, and basically what a fantastic dude he is. Now, he may have done these things, and I'm a firm believer in tooting your own horn. Most people don't do it. But he saved a bunch of people. He saved an alien from dying who risked his life doing it. I wonder, that seems to me to be a bit of fiction. He saved all these planes. Well, maybe he saved a plane or two, but it seems to be in every book he's saving one plane and one jet after another, and so forth and so on. Now, again, this makes very good book writing, very good fiction that you interweave with other stories. Is this a reality? Had he saved this many planes? Everywhere he goes, and he did it in Vietnam. He was a great hero there. So it's great hero, me, and all of this. And again, if you made that into a movie or wanted to sell an exciting book, you would put that in it. How much about aliens when there isn't that much really to talk about? Here's these floating entities that pop up. Well, okay, some people have been, but you have to go into more exciting things. And there are huge page after page of his involvement with terrible storms that came into these areas that trapped pilots in the air that he brought down safely. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's one instance that he mentions in the book where he failed. So these were horrible, horrible storms, and he was able to bring every single plane that came into his sphere of influence, and he saved every single one of them. Not a single one crashed. Well, I don't know. I find all that not too credible. The problem is when you start doing that in a book, where does it begin and end? So how much of that then goes into the aliens and what they're doing and what did you extrapolate on? This is the problem when you don't write a more subjective, boring, more scientific book describing the aliens. When you make it into a novel, there's a problem. But what I do like about it, and I think even with the fact of him saying how great he was, is that he's saying all the time of how horribly fearful he was and how he was one of the few people that knew how to deal with that. And of course, that makes sense. This is one of the most frightening things you can possibly encounter are spirits, ghosts, entities, demons, and extraterrestrials. There is nothing more frightening than that because it's completely the unknown. So hopefully that's helped a lot, and we'll pick this up in part 3.